3 days after they watched him die, the men who had loved Jesus most were still hiding in a locked room. The door was barred, the lamps were low, and every time footsteps passed in the street outside, someone in that room stopped breathing. These were not cowards. These were fishermen with rough hands and loud voices, men who had left everything to follow a teacher from Nazareth. But they had watched that teacher arrested. They had watched him beaten. They had watched him nailed to a Roman cross in broad daylight, while a crowd jeered. And now they were waiting for the same soldiers to come for them. Then the reports started coming in. The tomb was empty. A woman said she had spoken to him. 2 travelers said they had walked with him for miles. He was alive. Here is the strange part. He had already won. Death was behind him. The grave could not hold him. He could have stepped straight into heaven that first Sunday morning and left the world stunned and staring at an empty tomb. But he didn't. He stayed. For 40 more days, the risen Son of God walked the dirt roads of Judea and Galilee, appearing, vanishing, teaching, eating ordinary meals with ordinary people. And almost nobody talks about what happened in those 40 days. So here is the question this whole story turns on. If he had already conquered death, why wait? What was left to do? What did these men still not understand? This is not a story about an empty tomb. This is not a story about a stone rolled away. This is not a story about a miracle you have already heard 100 times. This is a story about the 40 days almost nobody talks about, and about a God who, having beaten death itself, spent his last weeks on earth doing something far stranger than a miracle. Because in those 40 days, Jesus did not go looking for the crowds. He did not go looking for the priests who had condemned him, or the governor who had sentenced him, or the soldiers who had mocked him. He went looking for the people who had run. He went looking for a weeping woman in a garden. He went looking for 2 men walking away from the city in defeat. He went looking for one disciple who swore he would never believe. And somewhere near the end of this story, on a quiet beach at dawn, he would kneel over a fire of burning coals and wait for the man who had failed him worst of all. We will get to that fire, but not yet. Start with the woman. It is still dark when Mary Magdalene walks toward the tomb. The Sabbath has ended, and she is carrying spices and burial oils, the last thing a grieving person can do for someone they have lost. She is not expecting a miracle. She is expecting a body, and she is coming to do the last, most tender thing that Jewish love knew how to do for the dead. Understand what that meant. In the 1st century, burial was not a quick thing. The historian Josephus and the Jewish writings of that age describe a careful ritual, the body washed, wrapped limb by limb in linen strips, packed with aromatic spices and oils to honor it, and hold back the smell of death. Nicodemus, John tells us, had already brought about 75 pounds of myrrh and aloes for Jesus' burial. But it had all been done in a rush, in the last hour, before the Sabbath began, when no work was allowed. So Mary is coming back at first light to finish it, to do it properly, to do it slowly, the way you do a thing, when it is the only thing you have left to give someone. Her only worry, as she walks, is a practical one. The stone over the tomb is enormous, and she is not strong enough to move it alone. But when she arrives, the stone is already rolled away. The tomb is open, and it is empty. Now understand what this moment costs her. She does not think he has risen. Nobody thinks that. She thinks someone has taken him, that even in death, they would not leave him in peace. So she runs. She runs back through the waking streets to find Peter and John, and the words tumble out of her. They have taken the Lord, and we do not know where they have put him. The 2 men race each other to the tomb. John is faster. He gets there first, but he stops at the entrance. He stoops. He looks in at the linen wrappings lying there, and something holds him back at the threshold, some mix of fear and reverence that keeps his feet from crossing. Peter has no such hesitation. Peter never does. He barrels straight past John and into the tomb, and he sees the linen cloths lying there, and the burial cloth that had been over Jesus' face folded up in a place by itself. Not torn away, not scattered as a grave robber would leave it. Folded, set aside, as if someone had simply finished with it and stood up. They do not understand. They go home. But Mary stays. She stands outside the tomb and weeps because grief does not know where else to go. And then a man is standing near her. She assumes he is the gardener. She barely looks at him. She just asks, through her tears, if he is the one who carried the body away, and if so, please tell her where. He says one word, Mary. That is all. Her own name, spoken the way only one person ever said it. And she knows. In Aramaic she cries out, Rabboni, my teacher, the most personal word she has. The first human being to see the risen Christ was not a priest, not a king, not a Roman official, or a crowd assembled in the temple courts. It was a grieving woman who had come to anoint a corpse. Here is what most people miss. In the first century, this detail was almost an embarrassment. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing in that same era, records how the testimony of women was not accepted as valid evidence in a court of law. If you were inventing a story to convince a skeptical world, you would never, not once, make a woman your first witness. Which is exactly why the fact that all four Gospels do is so remarkable. Nobody makes up the detail that undermines their own case. They kept it because it happened. And notice who he came for first. Not the powerful, the heartbroken, but it gets stranger. Because that same day, while Jerusalem is still spinning, two other followers are quietly giving up. They are walking to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from the city. One of them is named Cleopas. The other is never named, which, if you have ever felt too ordinary to matter in a story this big, might be the most important detail in it. As they walk, they are doing what heartbroken people do. They are going over it again and again. The arrest, the trial, the cross, the impossible rumors from that morning. They had hoped he was the one who would redeem Israel. And hope, once it dies, is heavier than grief. A stranger falls into step beside them. It is Jesus, but they do not recognize him. Luke simply says their eyes were kept from seeing it. And here is the thing that should stop you cold. He does not announce himself. He does not blaze with light. The risen Lord of the universe, with all of eternity at his back, chooses to walk 7 dusty miles beside 2 men who are walking away from him, and he starts by asking them what they are talking about. Then, step by step, he opens the scriptures to them. He does not start with the empty tomb. He starts at the beginning. He goes back to Moses, back to the first promises, and he walks them forward through the prophets, through Isaiah, who wrote of a servant wounded for the sins of others, through the Psalms that spoke of hands and feet pierced centuries before Rome ever nailed a man to a cross. Beat by beat, he shows them that the suffering they could not understand had been written into the story all along. The cross was not the moment God lost control. It was the moment the whole plan came true. Their world begins to turn right side up, and they still do not know who is doing it. When they reach the village, evening is falling, and they beg the stranger to stay. At the table, he takes the bread. He blesses it. He breaks it. And in that ordinary motion, a motion they had seen his hands make before, their eyes are opened. They know him, and instantly he is gone. Later they would say the words that have echoed for 2,000 years. Did not our hearts burn within us while he talked with us on the road? Notice, they did not recognize him by a display of power. They recognized him at a dinner table in the breaking of bread. Keep that in mind, because the God of this story keeps showing up not in the thunder, but at the table. So look at the pattern forming here. A grieving woman in a garden. 2 defeated men on a road. Every single time, he does not appear to the crowd. He appears to the one person who is breaking. He comes for the ones who ran. And if that is the kind of God you want to keep learning about, the kind who comes looking for people at their lowest, take a second right now and subscribe so the next part finds its way to you. And tell me in the comments where you are watching from. I never stop being amazed at how far this story travels. Because so far, everyone he has come for wanted to believe. They were grieving or confused, but their hearts were open. Now watch what happens when he comes for a man who has decided, out loud, that he will not believe at all. That same Sunday evening, the disciples are back behind a locked door. Think about where their heads are. Mary has told them she saw him. The 2 from Emmaus have burst back into the city with their impossible story. And still, the door is barred. Still they jump at footsteps in the street. Belief, it turns out, is not a switch you flip. You can be told the best news in the history of the world and still sit in the dark, waiting for the worst. And then he is simply there. No knock. No door opening. He is standing in the middle of the room, and the first thing out of his mouth is not a rebuke. He does not say, "Where were you when they took me?" He does not say, "I watched every one of you run." He says 4 words, "Peace be with you." Then he does something tender and strange. He shows them his hands. He shows them his side. He shows them the wounds, the holes the nails left, the gash the spear made. He does not hide what they did to him. He shows it to them, healed but not erased, and somehow that is the thing that turns their terror into joy. The proof that it was really him was the proof of what he had suffered. And look at what that does to the room. These are men who have spent 3 days drowning in it, the memory of running, the sound of the crowd, the last look he might have given them. They are not just afraid of the soldiers outside. They are afraid of him, afraid of what the risen teacher would say to the students who abandoned him. And the first thing he does is show them the wounds and wish them peace. Not one word of blame. The men who ran are the men he comes back for, and he comes back gentle. But one of them is not in the room. His name is Thomas, and when the others find him and pour out the news, "We have seen the Lord," he plants his feet. You know the line. "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my finger where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe it." Now, we have been unfair to Thomas for 2,000 years. We made him a punchline, doubting Thomas. But pay attention to this, because it changes how you see him. Thomas is not being faithless. Thomas is being honest. He had watched Jesus die, not heard about it, watched it. He had seen the nails go in, and he was not willing to patch the hole in his heart with a rumor. He wanted the real thing, or nothing at all. How many people do you know with the courage to say out loud what everyone else is only feeling? That is not the weakest man in the room. That might be the most honest one. So he waits, and here is the mercy in it. He waits 8 days. Sit in those 8 days with Thomas for a moment. 8 days of walking into a room where every other man has seen something you have not. 8 days of them describing the hands, the side, the voice, and you nodding and not feeling it. 8 days of wondering if the door that opened for everyone else has quietly closed on you. If you have ever stood on the outside of other people's faith, close enough to hear it, but unable to touch it, then you already know exactly how long those 8 days were. And then, same room, same locked door, Jesus comes again. And he walks straight to the one man who refused to believe. He does not shame him. He does not say, "So, the great skeptic." He turns to Thomas and offers him the exact thing Thomas demanded. "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side." He had heard Thomas. Even when Thomas said it to an empty room, Jesus had heard every word, and he came back specifically to answer it. The Gospels never even tell us if Thomas takes him up on it, whether he actually reaches out, because he doesn't need to anymore. Something in him just breaks open, and out of the man who demanded the most proof comes the biggest confession in the entire book. Not, "All right, I believe." Not, "Okay, it's really you." He looks at the carpenter from Nazareth and says, "My Lord and my God." That is the first time in any gospel that anyone calls Jesus God to his face. It comes from the doubter. Let that sit for a second. The man we mock for his unbelief is the one who saw most clearly who was standing in front of him. And then Jesus says something that reaches straight out of that room and lands on you. "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." He is not talking to Thomas anymore. He is talking about you. You, who will never put a finger in those wounds. You, 2,000 years down the line, hearing this story secondhand the way Thomas almost had to. He looked past the wall of that room and down the length of history, and he pronounced a blessing over everyone who would ever believe, without the proof Thomas got. He was thinking about you before you existed. Notice the ladder we have been climbing. He came for Mary in her private grief. He came for 2 men, and their shared confusion. Now he has come for a man whose doubt struck at the very center of the faith, and he answered it in person. The stakes keep rising, and they are about to rise one more time, because there is still one man he has not dealt with. A man who did not just doubt, a man who failed. Sometime later, the disciples go home, back to Galilee, back to the water they grew up on. And Peter cannot sit still. You have to understand what he is carrying. On the night they arrested Jesus, Peter had followed at a distance into the courtyard of the high priest. It was cold, and the servants had lit a fire. The gospel writer uses a very specific word for it in Greek, anthrakia, a fire of burning coals. Peter stood at that fire, warming his hands, and 3 times someone looked at him and said, "You were with him, weren't you?" And 3 times Peter said, "No, I don't know the man." The last time, a rooster crowed, and Peter went out and wept like his soul had been torn in half. That is what Peter carries back to Galilee. Not just grief, guilt, the specific, private guilt of the man who talked the biggest and folded the fastest. So he does the only thing that has ever quieted him. "I'm going fishing," he says, and a few of the others go with him. They fish all night. They catch nothing. And as the sky goes gray at dawn, a man on the shore calls out and asks if they have caught anything. "No, throw the net on the other side," he says. They do, and the net comes up, so heavy with fish they cannot haul it in. And John, who always sees it first, goes very quiet and says, "It is the Lord." Peter does not wait for the boat. He throws himself into the sea and swims for shore, because whatever is between him and Jesus, he cannot stand one more minute of the distance. And now watch what is waiting for him on that beach. A fire of burning coals. And here is the word again, anthrakia. Do you know how many times that exact word appears in the entire New Testament? Twice. Once in the courtyard, where Peter denied he ever knew him. And once here, on this beach, where Jesus is about to give him everything back. Of all the details the gospel could have recorded, it kept that one. Because Jesus did not restore Peter in the abstract. He built the exact same scene. The same fire. The same smell of smoke and charcoal in the cold morning air. He walked Peter straight back to the place he broke, because the place you fell is the place he means to rebuild you. They eat breakfast. He does not begin with the sermon. He feeds them first. And then, over the coals, he turns to Peter. And 3 times, once for every denial, he asks him about love. But listen closely, because the Greek underneath this is doing something the English hides. The first 2 times, Jesus uses the highest word for love the language has, agapao, the total, all in, laid down your life kind of love. "Simon, do you love me like that?" And both times, Peter cannot quite say it. He has learned something about himself in that courtyard. He knows now what his big promises are worth. So he answers, with a smaller, humbler, more honest word, "Phileo, Lord, you know I am your friend. You know I love you, as much as a man like me can." And the 3rd time, Jesus does the most tender thing in the whole exchange. He comes down to Peter's word. He stops asking for agapao. He asks, "Simon, do you phileo me? Are you really my friend?" He meets the broken man exactly where the broken man can stand. He does not demand the love Peter wishes he could give. He receives the love Peter actually has. By the 3rd time, the gospel says Peter was grieved. But do you see what Jesus is doing? He is not rubbing Peter's face in the failure. He is unwinding it. 3 denials in the dark, undone by 3 confessions in the light. And with each one, he does not say, "Never do that again." He says the opposite. "Feed my lambs. Take care of my sheep. Feed my sheep." He does not just forgive Peter. He rehires him. He hands the man who failed him worse the care of everything he is about to leave behind. And this is the thing you have to sit with, because it is the whole reason he stayed 40 days. You know this feeling. Maybe not the fishing boat or the courtyard fire, but the feeling of being the person who let someone down when it mattered most. The word you cannot take back. The moment you went quiet, when you should have stood up. The face of someone you loved, looking at you, waiting for you to be better than you were. And you were not. Most of us spend our whole lives believing that the worst thing we ever did is the truest thing about us. Jesus stayed 40 days to prove that it is not. He did not come back to win an argument with a skeptical world. He did not come back to parade his victory in front of the men who killed him. He came back for the ones who ran, the weeping, the confused, the doubting, and the man crying by the fire, and he put every single one of them back together with his own hands. That is what the 40 days were for, not proof, repair. And it held. We know it held because of what these people did next. The church historian Eusebius, writing in the 4th century, records the ends they came to. Peter, the man on the beach, went on to lead the church and, tradition holds, was crucified in Rome rather than deny his Lord a second time. Thomas carried the message east, as far as India, and died for it. Almost none of them recanted. And here is the plain fact of it. People do not die for something they know they made up. Frauds fold when the sword comes out. These men did not fold. Something happened on those roads, and in those rooms, and on that beach, that they could not unknow, and they went to their graves refusing to take it back. The frightened men behind the locked door became the men who lit the world on fire. That is what 40 days in the presence of a risen God will do to a person. At the end of the 40 days, he gathers them on a mountain in Galilee, and he gives them the assignment that will outlast every empire on earth. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Go, therefore, go to all nations, and make disciples, and baptize them, and teach them everything I taught you. Now stop and look at who is standing on that mountain. Fishermen, tax collectors, a man who denied him 3 times at a fire, a man who refused to believe until he saw the wounds. Not one theologian among them, not one man of rank or power or spotless record. He had the whole world to choose from. He could have waited and called the brilliant, the qualified, the ones who never wavered. He didn't. He looked at the exact group of men who had failed him, who ran in the garden, hid behind the door, doubted in the daylight, and denied him by the fire, and he handed them the whole world. That is the part that should stop you cold. The most unbelievable thing in this entire story is not that a dead man walked out of a tomb. It is that he took the people who let him down worst and made them the ones he trusted most. Grace does not just forgive your past. It takes your past, the very worst of it, and turns it into the reason you get sent. So before you go, carry this out with you. Those 40 days were never a victory lap. They were not a display of power. They were not a case being argued before a skeptical jury. They were a rescue, one broken person at a time. He stayed to put the people he loved back together before he ever trusted them with the world. And if he would cross death itself to repair a denier by a fire, then hear this plainly. Your worst moment is not your last word. The garden was not the end of Mary. The road was not the end of Cleopa. The locked room was not the end of Thomas. The fire was not the end of Peter. And whatever fire you are sitting beside tonight, warming your hands over the worst thing you ever did, that is not the end of you either. Because the same voice that spoke one word in a garden and turned a woman's grief inside out, the same voice that made 2 hearts burn on a dusty road, that reached across a room to a doubter, that rebuilt a broken man over a fire of burning coals, that voice has not gone quiet. It is still speaking. It is still saying names, and it has never once stopped coming for the ones who ran. So here is my question, and I want you to actually answer it. Of all 4 of those encounters, the garden, the road, the locked room, or the fire on the beach, which one would you have needed most? Tell me below, and tell me where you are watching from, because I love seeing how far he is still reaching. He beat death on a Sunday morning, and then he stayed 40 more days, not to be seen, but to come and find you.